Hi, Robert.
Hi, Mushtaq. Welcome to
Fr-
Friday.
Friday again. Yes, I really look forward to Fridays, not just because it's before the weekend, but because we have this conversation. And today, my suggestion is that we continue that discussion, dialogue about universities. And interestingly, I came across a piece of news in one of the Korean newspapers from 2024 that talked about a closure of some programs in one of the Korean universities. It was, of course, symptomatic of what happened in other universities as well. And the interesting thing is, we talked about the Chinese university being instructed by the government to close multiple degrees. We also talked about the UK approach of reaching out to think tanks and getting them to sort of socialize some of the ideas of what needs to be done with higher education. The thing that brought the Korean story to my attention is that students and staff had a funeral for their sociology department in Diego University. And when I started looking at it, it was 6 departments that were closed: law, sociology, and interestingly, one of them was electrical engineering and artificial intelligence. So it's not just directed at the humanities and social sciences. And the reason was poor enrollment. When I started reading more, I realized that from a demographic point of view, the number of students going to universities in Korea dropped by almost 40% within a couple of years, which is quite drastic, actually. And the demographic situation, the decline of the young people, and the increasing number of older people, making us aging society in general, is not, I think, a unique story to Korea. I can give some statistics later, but I just thought first to ask you, how do you feel about that situation that's happening in Korea, where now a higher education system that's built for almost 450,000 students is getting less than 300,000 students? And how is this symptomatic of what's happening elsewhere in the world?
So I'm going to have to be disciplined, Mushtaq, because there's so many things that fires off. I'll start with an indulgence in a bit of history. So in the UK, the expansion of higher education massively over a sort of 20 or 30-year period was driven by one of the regularly cited examples was the percentage of school leavers going to university in highly attractive economies like Korea. And so this
Mm.
knowledge-intensive, high-value, innovative economy was seen in the UK to be one of the reasons it was like that was the percentage of graduates. And so that has seen a real growth in the number of school leavers going from school to university in the UK, from a relatively low percentage when I went to university to a much higher percentage now. That's the first thing. The second thing is that the demographic shift is really, that's a pretty stark statistic, isn't it? You know, over 100,000 students fewer and a 40% drop. In the UK, we are currently in the midst of a bit of the opposite of that, where there are more school leavers in the short term, and that's predicted to peak in 2030 and then actually quite rapidly fall away thereafter. So there are predictions that within about 10 years from now, there's a short-term peak as we get towards 2030, but by the middle of the 2030s, that there'll be about a quarter less school leavers coming to university. A third thing is that the demographics are interwoven with an attitudinal thing about the politics of whether going to university is a good or a bad idea. And we spoke about that in a previous episode. So, of course, fewer people potentially able to come to university, but of those fewer people, maybe fewer of them inclined to come to university for a variety of reasons. And so that might see that might be one of the explanations in my own country, in the UK, as to why the drop of 40% that you see in Korea, which isn't as so the predicted demographic drop isn't as big in the UK, but it could actually turn out to be as big if there's 25% fewer school leavers available, and of those, a third of those choose not to come to university, then you'd see a similar sort of change. And then the fourth thing that strikes me, and then I'll pause for thought. The fourth thing is the parallels with other industries. And so, what you see when you see a huge expansion or contraction in an industry, particularly contraction, is that you tend to see consolidation, and either consolidation of current players or new entrants with different business models. So, if you look at the automobile industry globally, a handful of really big organizations, General Motors, Volkswagen, Audi Group, for a period of time as the market was consolidating, they began to acquire other brands and merge and to create bigger conglomerates. But even those big conglomerates now are faced with a rapid rise in electric vehicles rather than internal combustion engine vehicles, and new entrants to the market like Tesla from the US, or Build Your Dreams from China, and a range of other companies actually really aggressively undercutting and out innovating traditional providers. But you and I are both reasonably experienced higher education careerists, and I think we would observe that it's not that common for universities to merge. And yet you can begin to see some examples in the UK. There are a couple of examples of universities that are either in full merger. In the case of King's College and Cranfield, they've entered into a full merger, whereas Greenwich and Kent have decided to merge some of their back office provision but maintain two separate degree awarding powers and two separate kind of brand identities. And I think that is a reaction to financial pressure and economic pressure. And then I said I would
Uh,
stop and add one more thing, which is because you picked out sociology,
mm,
my lifetime in business schools, one of the things that's often said, and I'm not sure how empirically true it is, but it feels true, is that there are more historians and sociologists and psychologists working in business schools than there are in sociology or anthropology or history departments, because business management is such a big discipline area.
mm,
But of course, you only get these really brilliant scholars coming along applying sociology to management and leadership because they have a sociology degree, not because they've got a management degree. And so
mm,
there is something about how you curate that experience over time, which is it's uh, a national resource, I would suggest, and that therefore you might have to cross subsidize or incentivize participation in some of those subject areas. And this
mm.
time I really will stop.
No, no, that's very good. I think you took us into the region of thinking of the maps that change and the terrain that change and what new maps that we needed, and I'm sure we'll continue talking about that. I think the challenge, particularly in the Korean story, is really the lack of young people to do that, which is I think quite structural. So as I said, I was doing a little bit of reading, and the according to the literature, there's this term of a replacement fertility rate. So you need 2.1 to 2.3 children per woman for a society to be able to, to keep the ratio of young people, uh, and replace them so that they have enough young people to do not only education but other things, including employability, paying taxes, and so on. And interestingly, the East Asia, Japan, Korea, and China are really struggling. They are well below the fertility replacement ratio. Similar case, maybe less stark, but similar in most of Europe, and an emerging movement towards being below the replacement fertility ratio in the United States. The story is different in the sub-Saharan Africa, where they have a higher uh, uh, replacement fertility rate than is needed to just replace the young people. And so, but all in all, 50%, 55% of the countries in the world where 68% of the population live are below the fertility replacement or replacement fertility ratio. So uh, the situation is changing, and it's going to impact not only education, as I said, but it impacts everything, because as universities, I believe many of us have been designed, or the sector itself has been designed with a continuous flow of young people who are interested to doing degrees. So that we are designed for that. But at the same time, when we are having lower number of young people globally, the number of older people is increasing. So in the mid of 2030s, we will have more people who are at more older than 80 years old than we have infants. And I think that's a very interesting statistic. Sometimes it's measured by the sales of diapers, and the fact that some societies actually they sell more adult diapers than baby diapers. So it's yeah, it's a bit sad, but it actually gets the picture, makes it sort of sharper and clearer. And the examples that you've given us from other industries, and also the number of or the few cases of mergers that you referred to, are examples of some institutions having to act and respond to that challenge. But of course, there is the other element of actually catering from a lifelong learning point of view to the other end of the spectrum, to the people who are older, which I believe universities could actually do more in that space, because we've been, I think, uh, maybe offering similar programs that we have for the young people, and just say if the older ones would like to do it, then they are welcome. But I think this is a different segment that maybe needs to be addressed differently, and probably in a mapless world, the new maps need to take all of that into consideration. And I'll stop in a minute. The other element, which is, as we said, there are some countries where they are below the replacement fertility rate, and there are some who are higher, and that notion of maybe international students moving across, or universities to open up where they are needed, is an interesting idea. But of course, financials and funding and poverty levels and all of that are real challenges that we are facing, like any other sector. So maybe I hear your reflections on that, and then we try to move on into a bit more solution oriented kind of thinking.
So, in the subject of our theme around mapless world, there's a few different dimensions to the maps that we might be talking about. So one of them is, and if you look over the longer term, capacity. And so in countries like China and India and Nigeria, which have been net exporters of large numbers of international students for a long period of time, it's really been because they didn't have the capacity in their own country of university level education at the quality thresholds they were looking for, and therefore they if it was any other industry, you'd say that's an export-import relationship. And the UK has been a net beneficiary of that for a long period of time. We've got a large number of universities per head of population, brilliant, outperform our kind of punch above our weight, I guess you would describe as, in terms of some of those world-famous universities. But in many of those countries, significant investment has been going in to try and grow their own domestic provision of universities. And so that has reduced the export-import dynamic. So that creates a maplessness for both the host country and the the sender. So the UK is now having to deal with fewer international students, or the prospect of many fewer international students. And the home countries, China, Nigeria, India, wherever you're talking about, are having to think about how they resource those universities themselves. Then there's this meta thing about the demographic of people coming to university. And you're right to say that all of my working life, really, in universities, there has been this conversation that one of the things we could do better would be to engage with learning at every career stage and at every life stage. But we are still largely set up for people who are younger, who come straight from one form of full-time education, be it school or high school or college, into university. And by and large, I think we are slightly, well, we're more than slightly guilty of saying to any part-time or adult or flexible learner, you can come along if you can come every Tuesday between 10 and 11 and sit with the other young people, then you could have your lifelong learning. But as you and I know, that's not compatible with the lifestyles of working adults or people with caring responsibilities and so on and so on. So that's a different form of maplessness. If you're running a university now, given an infrastructure and a staff base and systems and processes that are set up for full-time undergraduate education by and large, how would you re-engineer all of that to be flexible enough to work completely differently? And I have for a long time thought that actually we are trapped in a set of things of our own making, that our timetabling, our rooms, our infrastructure, our assessment regimes, our delivery patterns are all set up for start in September or January and stay for 2 or 3 sets of 10 or 12 weeks and then go off for your holidays, where actually lifelong learning would require you to package that up in different ways. And if you were in work, you might, if you and I were sent on a course, I'm going on a course in the US in a couple of weeks' time. It's a 1 week, very intensive, all day, every evening, but then you're done. And if the ask had been, could I take out 1 day a week for a whole year, the answer would be no, it's not compatible with my working commitments. So there's a different kind of maplessness, which is how would I re-engineer a system? There's two versions of that challenge. How would I re-engineer a system if I was trying to make myself entirely flexible for lifelong learners, which is about systems and processes and curriculum and timetabling, but also how you engage those learners because they're different. But the second version of that challenge is how do I do that whilst at the same time still having to have responsibility for running the university as it currently runs for our full-time learners? And the centre of gravity of that conversation rests really with the full-time learners. So what happens if you look in other industries is often that it is some new entrant to the industry that reinvents the rules of engagement, whether that's in financial services or retail or automotive or travel, or it's often somebody who comes along and says, I don't have any of those, the baggage of the way in which you're currently organised, and I've got some disruptive new approach which allows me to operate quite differently. So I do wonder about some of the things we have seen in the last 5 or 10 years about corporate universities, where they're no longer recruiting graduates. They're saying, we'll recruit someone who's talented, and then we will put them through our own higher education process from a corporate university perspective. And work-based learning is a different form of learning than traditional classroom-based learning. So I think that individuals working in universities genuinely face multiple dimensions of maplessness. And for individual learners, they face a different set of choices about how to engage with their career, their need to generate income to pay for themselves. And so the employability challenge. And then to go back to the beginning of this bit of the conversation, for those colleagues who are facing the prospect of working for longer and having to reskill and upskill 2 or 3 times in their working lifetime because the technology around them is changing so fast, they're facing choices about how to do so whilst still earning money. And that's a different kind of maplessness. None of us have lived through a period where there are more older people who've already got financial resource built up over their careers in a different set of economic circumstances, and not enough young people to have state subsidy of healthcare or care for the elderly or social care. And that is a real worry right across multiple different developed economies.
Yeah, that's so true. And I think as the direction of travel remains in that trajectory, there is another dimension of maplessness where, of course, there will always be some highly ranked, well-branded universities that will always fill their lecture halls with students from all over the world because they are highly selective, while there will be some other universities who play multiple roles in the society, not only from training and knowledge creation, but universities are placemakers. They are employers. They do a lot of things, and they will be struggling to keep their existence even. So that will remain an important uh, tension. And of course, what makes a university highly ranked, I think probably ranking is a conversation that we'll have in another episode, but not today. I wanted also maybe for us to reflect on what are the factors, on the traits of the universities that maybe prevent us from innovating further. You've mentioned there might be people who are maybe beyond retirement or in retirement or towards their peak careers, where they'll be having the financial wherewithal so that they could actually do things and spend their money on things that or products that the university and services that the university as an institution could provide. Yet what we are saying is come on Tuesday from 10 to 11 and then we'll see what happens. I want to tension that also with the fact that universities are highly robust kind of and resilient kind of institutions, and that's why they resist change. And despite that, they have survived for such a long period of time. Maybe it's different now. I don't know, but because sometimes that robustness and resilience built within it that resistance to change, although we know that those it's survival, eventually evolution is about survival of the fittest, and the organism that is willing to change. So if we were to spend a bit of reflection on what's in us as academics and institutions that is actually an obstacle towards innovation. So probably a little bit of self-criticism, constructive self-criticism for a while.
So you know that I do love quotes, so I'm going to use two quotes. One, since you mentioned his work, Charles Darwin, a very eminent academic. And so that phrase that you use, survival of the fittest, in one of his early published works, he says it's not the fittest of the species that survives, it's the one most adaptive to change.
Mm,
And that's because the fittest survives if you and I are in direct competition for food as a resource in one lifespan. Then the fitter, stronger, more nimble, that wins out, right? So you get more food
mm,
than I do, and therefore you survive. But actually, if you look over the longer term, our ability to adapt to the circumstances changing, whether that is changing food sources or in our lifetime, global warming, or it's that kind of resilience from flexibility and adaptability. Then I'm going to use a different quote. But before I come to it, I'm going to make a point about adaptability. So the more adapted we become to our environment, the less adaptable we are. The more that we specialize to do one particular thing really well,
mm,
the less adaptable we are. So there's this tension between specializing to exploit the particularities of today's circumstances versus Darwin's sense that it's the most responsive to change that survive over the
mm,
longer term. So here's my second quote from the anthropologist Ed Hall. And he says, I really like this quote. He says, culture hides more than it reveals. And that
Mm.
which it hides most effectively from those that know it most. So what he's
Wow.
saying is, when you're working inside a situation, it no longer seems strange to you because you're so familiar with the culture.
Mm.
I think our institutions, our universities that you were saying, what would we be self-critical about? Is that we live inside those universities and therefore find it impossible to think that the world could survive without us.
Mm.
Find it as a thought experiment possible to think, well, what if we ran different delivery patterns and different pedagogies and different timetabling arrangements? And I find it quite hard to believe how we would do that, given we already have to do all the things that make us busy.
Mm.
So we therefore have this real sense in which we are very adapted to an environment which is driven to service the needs of full-time learners, largely straight from other types of full-time education, so mostly undergraduates. And in the latter part of my working life, so many of our international students come for MSc programs that are 1 or 2 years long, but are still full-time programs. So we have been schooled to deliver high quality, high volume experiences for full-time learners. And it's therefore really hard for us to imagine what would you do if you wanted to have flexible learning and build your own degree and so on.
Mm.
But you can see that that is what a new start would do. If you and I were starting a university tomorrow, or to open its doors in a year's time in Malaysia or in the UK, I doubt that you would do things in the way that we are currently doing them. And so we've got this odd
Mm.
thing that we're both in leadership positions in universities, responsible for keeping things going and trying to be innovative, but not really making breakthrough innovations. And yet, if we were both challenged with set up a really competitive university for the future, we probably would change some of the fundamentals about how we deliver.
Mm. This is a very profound angle, Robert, that you've just mentioned, because uh, we have been hearing that there is that segment that maybe will be interested in upskilling or lifelong learning that is older than the students that we are used to teaching and enjoy working with. But if I were to reflect on what does this segment want, I honestly have no idea, because currently when a young person comes into a university, whether they come on their own or their parents bring them screaming and kicking, I think you would say in that education there'll be self discovery, there'll be building of their social network, developing skills that and acquiring knowledge that will help them get a job and be productive citizens in the world. The other end, I am not sure what to offer them, and I also feel that we haven't really. Again, I'm not talking only about my university, but generally as educators, I don't think we have invested enough in going out there and learning, like a market research, from a market research point of view, to see what do they want. Do they really want certified learning, or do they want to come together? Because I think universities, as places, they are pretty amazing. You know, even some of our places, even architecturally, from our library, from the many things that we offer, if they are pitched in the right way, I think they'll be attractive. I hypothesize, but without we going out and seeing what do people want, we will be at the risk of, again, well, it's not Tuesday 1 to 10 to 11, but it's going to be maybe Wednesday 5 to 7 in the evening, because that's what you want. I think we really need to have the humility to realize that this is a segment that we have never really served, and we need to go and learn how to and ask them what do they want, and also accept that maybe they do not know what do they want, and maybe curate that with them. I think Doing that while, as you rightly said, we have to keep everything running because that's very important for the current business model, would require a very intentional leadership decision of allocating time and allocating resources, and accepting that the first couple of attempts may not work and they may just fail, and there'll be people say, "Ah, I told you so, don't waste your time." I think if we just focus on what we can do best, we will get better results.
So I'm going to layer a further level of complexity on top of that, because you're right. These are students that we only glimpse in part-time exec ed type settings,
Mm.
but we don't really understand, somebody who's maybe in their fifth, sixth, seventh decade, who's financially reasonably settled, but whose career's been disrupted and wants to upskill and learn a new thing. Don't really understand how they would behave. Therefore, we don't really understand what kind of timetabling, resources, learning environment, sense of community. I'm going to add one other layer of complexity, which is what business model.
Mm.
So the business model, by and large, whether it's the state that pays or the individual or their family and loved ones that pay, the business model, if you want a degree from Heriot Watt Malaysia or from University of Western Scotland or anywhere else, is, well, sign up for this degree and pay for it, thanks very much. And, at best it's, well, you can sign up module by module and then or we can split your payment plan across the year and you could pay chunks. But two of my other real passions in life, music and film, look at the way in which we consume those now. I used to go to the shops and buy an individual album by an individual artist so that I owned the physical artifact that would give me lifelong entitlement to listen to that piece of music or to buy a copy of a film. And if you look at it now, I subscribe to dozens of platforms,
Mm.
Apple Music and Netflix and HBO Plus and all of these other things. And it's all there. And I have unlimited access, but it's entirely up to me what I want to do with it. So what
Mm.
if the business model for these lifelong learners was more like a subscription than a purchase? Where you said, there's all this stuff that we run all year round. You've paid your academic equivalent of a gym membership or a Netflix subscription. We'll allocate you Professor Mushtaq, who is your academic advisor, who might listen to you think about what you want to do in your life and make some recommendations of people who like that module, might like this module. There could be some infrastructure behind that, which is if you earn another 3 modules, you could build that into a certificate or a diploma or a degree or a master's. Or it's a very different way of thinking of the proposition, isn't it? It's about a
Mm.
community, and what you're paying for is to be part of that community and to dip in and out as you see fit. That's very different than the proposition that if you pay us this many thousand ringgits by this date, you can start in September and finish in June and have your graduation in July.
Mm.
And so
Mm.
not only do we not understand the delivery mechanism for these lifelong learners, I don't think we've figured out how you could monetize that in a way which was fair to the learner, but also fair to the provider.
I think that's there's so much learning from the subscription model because as you speak, I'm reflecting on the number of subscriptions that I'm just paying money for and I've never used in quite a
Used a
bit of
while
time.
ago,
And
I haven't used recently.
yeah, and then probably I need to go and audit them uh, to see what happens. So if anyone loses business, they know who to blame. Yeah. But I think the bit that I realized is when you said you're assigned a professor. I think I would pay for that. I would pay for someone who would maybe work with me to recommend things for me to watch because with abundance comes like I could go to Netflix and I spend I don't know 20 minutes just browsing, not finding anything
Yeah.
to watch. But sometimes all I need is someone say, "Have you watched this?" And then a recommendation is so valuable because I think this automated recommendation so far hasn't really worked for me. It has worked sometimes, but most of the time, they say, "We think you will love this." When I checked it, I didn't really love it. But when someone knows me, like yourself or some of our other colleagues, and sometimes they say, it's like this show on Netflix or Apple TV or whatever, is fascinating. So I think that community, which we do so well, is the thing that we ought to hold on to, because again, as you described the other part of the subscription model, I think the younger generation would love that too. You know, it could be actually the model that we offer everything in. So maybe at the end of the day, we do not need to keep the brick and mortar and the where you buy the CD and at the same time give you the Netflix or the Spotify. I think they could be, you know, it's one model where you have the Spotify and all of that, but also you have a place where you could come and have a cup of coffee and meet real people who are really interested in you, wanting to know about your learning, how you are getting on with life and things like that. And I think probably when we strip our model educational model and educational offering to the core, I think at the end of the day it's all about people. It's about that professor who inspired you, or that person who were actually even challenged you, but you would remember them, you know, for years later. And I think these memories are so valuable and so effective, even in anchoring the learning and keeping us connected to ourselves, to our communities. And maybe that is the key part that we could and should innovate around. And maybe at the end of the day, we find that it's actually what all the younger people need at core is the same. They want things that are helpful, useful, done in an enjoyable way, and while and doing them with other people. So it's done in a social setting.
So let's take this analogy a little bit further with the world of music, because it's a
Mm,
thing that I love. So you can think of three different types of interaction. So one is the Spotify, iTunes, Amazon Prime Music subscription, where you have this endless digital library that you can dip in and out of. Actually, I find with music rather than film or TV, the people who like this might like that works more for me than it does with cinematic things. Found I found other musicians and artists that I've really liked and would never have come across. So that's one form. So you could have the learning resource of the university, all this digital content that you can dip in and out of. There's a second kind of interaction, which I really love, live music. And so I've often thought that if you and I were starting a university from scratch next year, a music festival is a better way of thinking about the use of the campus. Because at the moment, we have your campus and my campus will be quieter in the summer, and there'll be big periods in the year where it's very busy, and then other big periods in the year where there's hardly anybody around. And so a different way of thinking about that is to say you make the campus this thing that you come to for a very intensive experience. You come for a week or two when there's lots of things, and it is 9 till 5 and things in the evening and breakfast briefings, but then you disperse. So you've got the digital library of resources like the subscription, Spotify, Apple Music. You have the Glastonbury Festival thing of where you come along to this thing and you see all of these things live, and there's something enchanting about that. And then there's this third thing, which is one-to-one tuition. So you sit with somebody who actually does take the time to understand what you're doing, talks to you about what you've got out of the learning festival that you've just attended, talks to you about what you're doing in your work or what you aspire to do in creating your own business or whatever it is that you're doing, makes some recommendations about other learning experiences to have, and then agrees to see you in a few months' time or at the end of the academic year, and that is part of your subscription, that you have these three different kinds of resource that you can dip in and out of. That sounds to me like a really appealing, compelling thing. The likelihood of any current university being able to transition to that model seamlessly is low because of all of the learned behaviours that we have. But it does sound like a really compelling and very different kind of university. And I've got one last thing to add to that, which is a different kind of analogy. Have you heard of the exercise company Peloton, the people that do the home exercise bikes? No. So during the pandemic, this high-end exercise bike with a digital screen and some monitors on it. And so you could engage in high intensity cardio exercise at home. And of course, during the pandemic, when you couldn't go to the gym, people bought these things in their thousands, and they were quite expensive, and they were on a subscription model. So you paid 30, 40, 50 pounds a month to be a member of the gym, and then you paid a further 70, 80, 100 pounds a month for a period of a year or two to buy the piece of equipment. And they were rampantly successful for a period of time in and around the pandemic. And then their sales fell off a cliff because people could go back to the gym and realize they had this thing, which was a very expensive clothes drying machine because you could hang towels on it, and stopped using it. And so they started selling them. And a new chief executive came in, and rather than panicking, he said what they'd really focused on was that the people were not so interested in the exercise, they were interested in the community. So when you signed up to an exercise class, I might meet Mushtaq from 8 hours away in time zone terms and thousands of miles away, but he's in the same exercise class as me. We have the same kind of class leader. There's bits of community and engagement and social pressure to keep exercising. And since then, they've really recovered as a business. And this thing that the chief executive said, that people don't come for the equipment, they come for the people, and they stay for the people. That's maybe the thing that will underpin the learning model for a lifelong learner, is that they come to be inspired by people that they think are really creative, challenging thinkers who have their best interests at heart, and say, well, Mushtaq, if you want to get that skill set, the thing to go and do is to learn some introductory sociology, to go back to our Korean example from earlier.
Mm.
I know you don't think you need to know that, but I think it's going to be so important for you to understand these basic concepts before you go on to do this other thing.
So, Robert, this is very insightful. I think you played intentionally or not your role as a strategy professor to bring these examples from different industries, because I don't think um, in academia we have done that deep soul searching to really learn from an automotive and from the automotive industry, or the exercise industry, or whatever other industry. But I think that is so, or the music industry. I think this is so important. And as you speak, I was reflecting on maybe one difference between the 18, 19-year old and maybe those who are in the other sort of extreme of the spectrum of people that we might be uh, interested in attracting, and those in between. And I think the what is different would be the level of motivation. So uh, we have some of the younger people who come to university because they have figured out their purpose. They know exactly what they want to do. They're highly motivated to learn. And I would like to argue that this group, even if there was no university, they would have actually learned whatever they want to learn, because there is sufficient content out there. But there is the other group that is, which is in the majority, of students who have really not worked out what do they want to do, and often they go to the university, or their parents push them to go to the university, so that the structure that we put around between 10 to 12 and on lecture theater 1, because if you don't put that structure, they would not even show up. So that structure is so useful to them, to see them going through from stage 1 to stage 2 to stage 3. And then through that, hopefully they will be discovering their passions, and they're working socially. And then they realize that, wow, I really want to become a sociologist or an engineer. While maybe the other groups are groups that they know what they want, and they know that we don't offer what they want, whether it's because of the way we offer it or because of the content. And that is maybe the main difference that we need to start thinking about, to see how we can address it, because that's an addressable market, and it's a value that we could add, and it will help us, because now we need it as universities. We need that kind of market. The other element is, in universities, sometimes you find the highest level of openness and collaboration. When researchers come and literally, freely discuss some ideas that are groundbreaking. If it's in the industry, you'd be sacked if you have shared this kind of finding that you've discovered in the lab of University A, where you just go to a conference and just openly just share it with everyone. But at the same time, there are examples of how closed universities are towards collaboration. And I think one of the challenges is universities could be a bit more collaborative in recognizing each other's content and each other courses. So if someone wanted to do maybe two courses from University A and maybe three courses from online and something else, and although even in Malaysia we actually do have the the regulatory framework to recognize all of that extra credit, very few universities are willing to do it. So if you come and say, look, I've learned this from the internet and I've done this MOOC and I started something in New Scotland, so I've got a couple of credits from University of West of Scotland or whatever. And now I'm coming to University A or B in Malaysia, where I could do maybe a final year project and a few other things. And then I would like you to offer me the degree. Universities would refuse, without them really like doing 70, 80% of the teaching. Partly, I think, for pride, partly for financial reasons, partly for fear that the quality is not there. And I think these are the things that we need to move on in terms of finding ways to certify all of that, to offer hopefully really an unprecedented value to people throughout the spectrum, so that on all ages and all stages in life, because that would be, I think, very necessary for the survival of many of the universities, if not all of them.
And you're right to say that we do little bits of accreditation of prior learning, but we do it begrudgingly and usually by exception. So that
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
usually, well, I started my degree at Heriot-Watt University in Malaysia. I did the first 2 years, but then my family moved and now I'm in Scotland. And can I come into third year with these credits? And we, well, look at it carefully and we kick the
Mm-hmm.
tires and we begrudgingly say, well, he's a nice guy, Mushtaq. He's had difficult circumstances. Let's let him in, see how he gets on. But never in my working life in the university sector have I seen somebody saying, so I'm currently doing 60 credits at Taylor's in Malaysia, 40 credits at Heriot-Watt University Malaysia, and I want to do 20 credits with you at University of West of Scotland at your Ayrshire campus to make up my 120 credits for the year. Because well, we can't be doing that. You have to have one provider.
Mm-hmm.
And I can accredit prior learning. I'm not accredited contemporary learning from somebody else. That's not. But look at the way we live our lives. We buy some of our groceries in one store and some in another, and we buy some of our travel insurance from one provider, but our current account is with another. Our mobile phones, even my family members have got different mobile phone providers. We're quite used to this blended lifestyle, but the university sector is not switched on to that at all. So there's another further layer of complexity. I've already introduced this idea that you might have a membership of a university and have a subscription. But what if your membership was to a group of universities that said you could pick anything from any of these places? And I've often thought that there are some things that you could learn that are fairly samey wherever you go. So I'll use my subject area. That doesn't, you don't have to be a professor of strategy at the world's most elite universities to know what a SWOT analysis is. So you could do that digitally at somewhere that was not particularly research intensive. Maybe even the teaching quality isn't that great, but really doesn't rank very well. And if that's one of the things you have to learn, you'd learn that at a low cost, high volume model. But there might be something else you want to do, which could be to do with, I don't know, dynamic capabilities or something more complicated in the strategy world. And you think, I really, really want to go and study with Professors Alatabi and McIntosh, who wrote the groundbreaking text on this thing at university or somewhere prestigious. And it's going to cost me a small fortune because they only admit 100 students a year and they work really closely with them, but I'm going to treat myself to that.
Mm,
And again, if you think about the way in which we buy travel or other things, we make those decisions all the time. I'll go to this Michelin-starred restaurant for my birthday, and the next day I'll eat at an all-you-can-eat buffet because it's only $3.99.
mm,
And so the
mm,
contemporary co-present different providers and different types of provision is not a thing that we are set up to deal with.
mm. So, as we close this conversation, Robert, I think we feel that the challenge is real, the pressure is deep, and potentially this is the time for universities to change. Universities usually have, among the smartest, more interesting people who have been theorizing great things for other industries, and maybe it's time for us to hold the mirror for ourselves and start learning from other industries. I really enjoyed reflecting on how other industries are facing the challenges that we are now becoming uh, confronted with, and how we can learn from one another, from each other, to respond to a highly changing and increasingly mapless world.
Indeed. And so maybe in centuries from now, people look back at this podcast and find it and say, well, they panicked over nothing. Universities are still doing what they were doing. But I have a feeling that this is a particular type of change, that it's on
Yes,
multiple levels, and that's precisely why it is a mapless world. And in that
it
mapless
is.
world, we need some brave new adventurers to go and think big thoughts about what might be out there.
Absolutely. And I think some of these new thoughts will become just a necessity because
Yeah,
standing still won't cut it.
yeah.
Robert, thank you very much. As usual, insightful, enjoyable, and highly enriching. Really appreciate it.
That's why Friday lunchtimes are the best bit of the week now, Stack.
Fantastic. Thank you. It's same for me here.